Chapter 2. What Blooms in Darkness. A crash of splintering glass shattered the quiet, jerking Rosalind from sleep. The sound was crisp and final, possibly ice shearing from a rooftop and smashing against stone. In the pre-dawn gloom, she felt for the hurricane lamp on her bedside table. The lamp flared to life, casting an amber glow in her bedroom. Though the coal-fed radiator hissed, a persistent draft pressed against the window panes, creeping beneath the door. Rising, she tugged a woolen shawl over her high-necked nightgown, warmed from sleep, and slipped into a pair of house slippers. Thinking better of it, she quickly washed her face in a basin and pitcher on her washstand, then changed into a wool dress, socks, and low-heeled boots. Had a branch fallen in the wind? A shiver prickled her skin, the chill needling through wool and cotton. The temperature had dropped so low that her breath clouded. The faded blue wallpaper chosen by her mother years ago and the garden-themed quilts stacked at the foot of her four-poster bed offered little comfort. She lifted the lamp, its brass handle smooth under her fingers. With a turn of the knob, she entered the darkened hall. She tiptoed, not wanting to wake Mrs. Barrett with the hushed give of the old plank floors. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 4, each measured chime consistent. She reached the conservatory and peered inside. Broken glass hadn't awakened her. However, dozens of flowers had sprouted through the flagstone floor. A figure stood among them. The stranger from that morning. The plants appeared to tilt in his direction, drawn by an unseen current. His platinum hair reflected the lamplight, like frost-dusted branches glistening beneath a pale sun. His expression conveyed an understanding, able to see beyond words to the thoughts and questions she didn't voice. "It isn't dawn yet," she said. "No, but it will be soon." He smiled, contradicting the sharp angles of his face. "You've read the portfolio." It wasn't a question. "Yes, but how did you get it?" Rosalind held her chin level. "And who was my grandmother to you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to the flower beds. More growth had appeared, green and vital. "I can help your conservatory, Miss Drew, and restore life." "Can you give a straight answer?" He smiled again. "Probably." That was hardly a straight answer, but could he really? The idea welled up. Hope, but also unease. "How?" she asked. "That depends." "On what?" Rosalind placed the lamp on a potting table. "I want the truth." "Good. Let's start with your name." "Edmund Winterborne." "Edmund Winterborne? Well, that wasn't very hard, was it?" Rosalind tested the name, finding it both fitting and wholly inadequate. "All right, next question. Why are you here, Mr. Winterborne?" "To provide you with a solution." He touched a dying lily, and frost melted from its leaves. "Your grandmother wanted to ensure that her life's work succeeded." "Yes, of course. What else?" "Optimism." "Optimism isn't a solution." He inclined his head toward the window where the town lay cloaked in snow. "Imagine a renewal, the land awakening, laughter once more in sunlit fields." "How?" Questions crowded her throat, but a noise from the main house distracted her. "We'll speak more about an agreement later." He opened the door, soon striding down the path until swirling flakes obscured him from view. Only the strange blooms dotting the flagstone floor proved she hadn't imagined the entire encounter. "What agreement?" She stared at the town below, population shy of 12,000, and traced the familiar grid of streets. Federal Street, with its row of shops, and the Beacon, an apartment hotel. High Street, leading to the textile mill. Church Street, linking the Congregational, Methodist, and Catholic churches, where people prayed for spring's return. Workers' cottages sat in orderly rows, their wood siding dulled by years of soot, with narrow yards where the last brittle stalks of summer's vegetable gardens were untouched. The ceaseless winter had blurred many distinctions. Even the bank president split his own firewood now. Such was the great leveler, turning proud men humble and humble men wise in the strategies of survival. Rosalind grabbed her coat and stepped outdoors, seeking fresh air to organize her thoughts. The moon cast long shadows across newly revealed grass, and she pulled her collar tighter. Halfway down the hill, wildflowers grew in flawless concentric circles, each exactly 7 flowers radiating outward as ripples upon the water. "These shouldn't bloom for at least another month, and never in this cold," she whispered. Dr. Caldwell, the town physician, waved to her from across the street. He'd apparently been making pre-dawn house calls. "Unusual, isn't it?" He indicated the flowers when he reached her. "Looks as if someone's been writing in blooms across Greenfield." Mr. Winterborne, the dying lily. Whatever was happening, the events clearly centered around her visitor. If these changes had occurred after their brief conversations, what would happen if they discussed anything at length? She hurried back to the conservatory and through the iron and glass corridor to her office. Her grandmother's portfolio rested on the desk. The worn pages hinted at the terms of an agreement, a debt of winters to secure years of abundant bloom. Between detailed drawings of plants, she'd penned notes about the town, families receiving therapeutic herbs, lists of children benefiting from breathing treatments, letters of thanks from the hospital, where specialized medicines assisted physicians in easing a patient's pain. A knock at the door startled her. "Miss Drew?" Mrs. Everett, the town's long-trusted midwife, stood in the doorway clutching a well-used leather pouch. A modest cap neatly held her gray hair, and a thick wool coat, buttoned to her chin, protected her from the biting wind. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's difficulty at the Fitzgerald household. Abigail Fitzgerald has been in labor for hours." "It might be safer if she admitted herself to Franklin County Public Hospital here in town," Rosalind urged. "Fitzgerald women don't run to doctors unless they must. They birth their babies exactly where they belong, at home, with their family, not in some clinic full of strangers." The midwife shook her head. "Hospitals are for the sick, not for bringing new life into the world. The willow bark extract you provided has eased many births. I need it to help this little one along." "Of course. Please, come in." Rosalind led the midwife down the corridor. The midwife scanned the conservatory. If she noticed the flowers blooming on the flagstone floor, she didn't remark on it. Rosalind retrieved an earthen bowl from a side cabinet and mixed a blend of willow bark extract, dried elderberry, and a trace of chamomile. This was a cherished formula, renowned for easing the pains of labor. However, healing wasn't only about the medicine. It was about the prayer and attention one put into preparation. "We're stewards of God's garden," Grandmother would often say, using his gifts to benefit his children. Rosalind whispered a blessing over each remedy. "It's colder in here than usual," the midwife remarked. The heating system Rosalind's father had installed in 1912 should have kept the place warm through Massachusetts' winter conditions, though these past 3 years defied all normal measures. "The furnace struggles in these cold temperatures," Rosalind murmured, "like everything else in town." Mrs. Everett sighed. "The mill warns of closing permanently. Too expensive to keep the furnaces going. That's an additional 50 families who'll have to leave." Rosalind looked up, encountering the woman's weary stare. "Then we'll do our best to remind them they're not alone." The townspeople's trust required tending, Some thrived, while others required encouragement to recall spring's promise. After Mrs. Everett left, Rosalind returned to the portfolio. Another pressed flower fell from between the pages, a wildflower. Her grandmother's handwriting identified First Bloom of Spring, 1888. During that period, the conservatory had been her grandfather's pride, erected when he'd made his fortune in shipping. 3 years later, in 1891, he'd been lost at sea. Afterward, grandmother had transformed the conservatory from a wealthy man's showpiece into a sanctuary that benefited the community. Rosalind said a prayer, asking for guidance about Mr. Winterborne's upcoming offer, if that was indeed what it was. Then she inserted the pressed flower back between the pages. Out in town, light shone in the Pattersons' window where they tended their twins, and from the bakery as Mrs. Grayson kneaded bread for the day. The mill's shadowy silhouette spoke of a silent witness to futures poised on the edge of closing. The rhythm of approaching footsteps made Rosalind turn. "I thought I heard voices." Mrs. Barrett stood in the doorframe, her practical gray dress and white apron crisp despite the early hour. A widow, since 1910, she carried herself with the dignity of a woman who'd learned to build a new life from sorrow. Everything about her was orderly, from her hair tied back in a neat bun to her sensible black shoes. She'd come to them first as mother's nurse in 1912, then stayed on as housekeeper. She managed the Drew household with discreet efficiency, from overseeing the conservatory's books to ensuring Rosalind remembered to eat when she worked late. "The midwife stopped by," Rosalind said. "Before that, I heard a man's voice." She studied Rosalind's face with the same careful attention she displayed when Rosalind was a grieving young girl. Her green eyes held the warmth that had comforted Rosalind through every loss. "Is everything all right?" "Why wouldn't it be?" Rosalind tucked her hands under the edge of the table to steady herself, choosing not to respond to the question. Instead, she inquired, "Do you recall grandmother's advice concerning the seasons?" Mrs. Barrett checked the thermometer mounted outside the glass. "God plants unique gifts in each season. Though I confess, this season has overstayed its welcome." Rosalind thumbed through her grandmother's notes. One recounted how honey and thyme eased a mill worker's cough, a second on the widow who found purpose by assisting in the garden, the third about the town itself, becoming stronger through shared hardship. What would it mean to lose all this? Soon, dawn painted the eastern sky in streaks of coral and amber, the colors vivid against the brittle blue of daybreak. Grandmother had lingered in this same spot, weighing what she valued most. Choose wisely. What did she mean? Sometimes the toughest choices were the simplest, once you understood what mattered. "Mrs. Barrett, will you fetch the copper pitcher?" Rosalind asked. "The one for special seedlings?" The housekeeper bobbed her head, disappearing into the connecting corridor. Rosalind returned to the portfolio. "Water from the old well feeds more than roots. It feeds faith itself," her grandmother had written in the margins. The well. Of course. Rosalind had always viewed the well as a metaphor, though now it felt tangible, more urgent. Was it more than a water source? Was it a symbol of everything she was trying to understand? Mrs. Barrett reappeared holding the pitcher. "I haven't seen you use this since grandmother's last sunrise, before she died." Rosalind accepted the pitcher. Together, the women walked through a maze of withering plants. The old well was in a sheltered corner of the original greenhouse, its stone rim worn by years of use. Her mother had loved this spot, often bringing her Bible on warmer days to read among the climbing roses. Your grandmother never explained to me why she continued to use this well after modern plumbing was installed, Mrs. Barrett said, helping Rosalind with the pump handle. She insisted that some items must remain unchanged. The pump groaned, then yielded a stream of cold, clear water. I remember several times when she was out here before dawn, Mrs. Barrett continued. She was always talking to the same man. When I questioned her, she assured me all seasons come in due time. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under heaven, Rosalind recited from the Bible. Mrs. Barrett, her keen eyes forever watching, studied Rosalind for several seconds. What's troubling you, dear? Besides this dreadful weather, that is. She'd known her long enough to know when something was off. Rosalind set down the pitcher. I'm sure you're aware that Atlantic Botanical has offered to purchase the conservatory. They'd modernize it, of course, tear down the glass walls, and bring in new equipment. She let out a fatigued sigh. On the positive side, we'd never struggle with heating costs again. But, Mrs. Barrett asked, but it will no longer be as grandmother established it. Now it's a center that serves the community, that helps those who have no money for fancy clinics or expensive medicines. Rosalind approached the window. There are countless families out there who pay in vegetables from their gardens, and mothers who tend the herbs in exchange for healing treatments. All of this would end. The sun's initial rays caught the topmost panes of glass as Greenfield awakened. The mill whistle would soon blow, summoning employees to their posts. That is, if the furnaces could continue running for another day. Your grandmother faced the same dilemma, Mrs. Barrett murmured. Back in 1891, companies wanted to buy her out then, too. What did she do? She prayed. Then she went to the well, filled the copper pitcher, and spent the day watering every plant by hand. Declared if God meant this site to benefit people, he'd show her how to maintain it. Let's fill all the cans and water every plant. The housekeeper smiled. Of course, I'll fetch more pitchers. We'll start with the medicinal herbs, the feverfew and chamomile, because the Pattersons will need more of each if the twins relapse. I see that your father's letter arrived, Mrs. Barrett said, as she refilled another pitcher, and they advanced to the next aisle. I suppose it's concerning the Atlantic Botanical offer. It is. He believes Atlantic is the sensible choice for me. Current techniques, up-to-date strategies. He has well-meaning intentions, dear. Mrs. Barrett patted Rosalind's hand. He's determined to secure your future through any avenues. What about everyone else's future? Rosalind advanced to the next row of plants. Who will provide Dr. Caldwell with his medications, or support families when they're financially strained? Mrs. Barrett shook her head. The whistle at the textile mill sounded, the tone thinner than usual. Rosalind imagined Mr. Harrison stoking the furnaces, attempting to stop the machinery from freezing. Do you hear that? Mrs. Barrett paused. The mill whistle? Number something else. I can't describe it. Another sound carried through the glass walls, the crack of shifting ice. The thermometer, Mrs. Barrett whispered. Look. Rosalind twisted to the tube mounted by the door. The mercury had risen 3 degrees in the last hour, and a single vibrant shoot had emerged from the feverfew patch. She paused, hardly daring to inhale. More tiny points of green emerged through the dark soil, including the vanilla orchids that supplied Northampton's research hospital. A sharp rap at the front entrance prompted both women to turn. Please come in, Rosalind called. The door's open. Professor Merrick, a senior academic of botany at Greenfield College, entered, his leather briefcase in hand. Good morning, ladies. I realize it's early, but I'll get right to it. The specimens you sent last week, Miss Drew. He shook snow from his wool coat. They've delivered remarkable results in our respiratory experiments, unlike anything we've documented so far. He studied the fresh growth in the many rows of plants. How on earth did you manage something like this? Rosalind traded a smirk with Mrs. Barrett. Plants thrive with proper care, she replied. The professor knelt by a seedbed, professional skepticism faltering as he removed his spectacles to peer closer. I've studied botany for 30 years, he muttered, and never... He straightened, and his voice trailed off. The Board of Trustees at Greenfield College convenes this afternoon, and they're deliberating on establishing a permanent base here. This will complement our affiliate medical school. If you presented your cultivation methods for... Here? She repeated. They want to establish a base here? Is that what you really came to tell me? I assure you that the university and the conservatory would collaborate. They will probably appoint you as the lead botanist. Professor Merrick, with his graying temples and fatherly manner, reminded her of the academic mentors she'd studied under at Smith College. Yet it was the memory of the handsome visitor with his platinum hair and kind eyes that quickened her pulse. Quickly she put aside the thought. Beyond, the mill's brick tower rose stark against the brightening sky, the workers trudging through drifts, bracing for another bleak day. Mrs. Barrett's knowing eyes took in the scene with Professor Merrick before she excused herself. I believe your discussion requires coffee, she announced, a lifetime of discretion in her measured retreat. Shortly after, she returned, carrying a tray with freshly brewed coffee in Rosalind's mother's prized Haviland china. The coffee, rich and intense, came with a small jug of cream, a dish of sugar cubes, and buttered scones, their golden brown tops crisped to perfection. She positioned the tray on a side table between two chairs, arranging the cups, saucers, and scones with customary care. Offering a brief nod, she stepped out, leaving Rosalind and the professor in quiet conversation. The board assembles at 3. Professor Merrick seated himself opposite Rosalind. They are especially interested in your projects with native plants. We've never witnessed cultivation methods comparable to yours. He extracted a letter from his coat with the university's embossed letterhead and placed it between them. Our faculty collaborates with Smith College in Northampton, which may mean several trips there. Travel isn't a problem for you, I presume. You have no family or children to attend to. I don't mind, she replied. Smith College is my alma mater. Though her mind wasn't on traveling. Her mind had drifted again to Mr. Winterborne. He'd hinted at an end to winter. But how? He hadn't proposed turning the conservatory into a research hub, though that might be what he truly intended. He could have resources and connections she wasn't aware of. However, would his vision align with her legacy? Or would it remove the essence of what Rosalind had striven so hard to preserve? We'll need your answer today. Professor Merrick's voice broke her thoughts. Today? Why the rush? I'm in touch with your father, and he mentioned you received another offer from Atlantic Botanical. I can assure you the college's proposition is better. He gave a brief smile and pushed back his chair, drinking the last of his coffee. 3 o'clock, Miss Drew. Agreed? He hadn't given her much leeway, and it wouldn't hurt to meet with them. A few minutes later, Rosalind indicated her agreement, and Mrs. Barrett showed the professor out. In the conservatory, more shoots angled toward the strengthening sunlight. The plants were definitely growing. More importantly, they were thriving. Reminiscent of Greenfield, surviving against difficult odds, neighbors aiding neighbors, finding faith in the tiniest signs. Rosalind crossed her arms and leaned against the wall. Several paths were now presented to her. However, the most difficult decisions weren't between good and bad, but between good and different. between the safety of the established path and the allure of an ambiguous one. From the college's proposal, a proper research facility would have advanced irrigation systems, ideal in every way, and working here in town was convenient. Mrs. Barrett appeared and gathered the coffee cups on a tray. "Professor Merrick seems quite certain you'll agree to the college's proposal," she said. "He reminds me of your father, continually wanting to modernize despite the old ways being effective." Rosalind contemplated the exhausted laborers, the impoverished families. What best served them? A state-of-the-art facility resulting in higher fees, or a place where reasonable prices grew alongside healing? This wasn't the first time she'd stood at a crossroads. Calvin Davis, her former beau, had presented her with another form of security. His marriage proposal had been exactly what society deemed appropriate: financial stability and a respectable position. 2 years earlier, when her grandmother, Elizabeth Drew's health failed, he'd presented Rosalind with a gold ring and promises of a comfortable future. His telegram, proposing that they head west to California, had arrived the same day as the news of her grandmother's stroke. "You won't have to worry about this place anymore," he'd said when he visited, as though the conservatory were a burden rather than Rosalind's calling. His face, when she'd refused, first confused, then dismissive, revealed how little he'd understood her. He'd meticulously folded the telegram, tucking it into his breast pocket with the deliberate actions of a judge sealing a verdict. His gaze swept over the drooping plants before adjusting his hat and marching away, leaving in its wake a silence. His departure often emerged in her darkest hours, when one more plant faded. Had she, in fact, sacrificed her chance at happiness for a legacy destined to perish despite her best efforts? Few understood her determination to remain at the conservatory rather than forge a more conventional path. Her father certainly didn't. Calvin was a young, ambitious doctor. Her life would have been ideal. Now, more than ever, her father's letters increasingly urged her to consider practical considerations over sentimental attachments. Number? She couldn't do that. Each time she watched a child breathe easier after her herbal treatments, or experienced Dr. Caldwell's grateful acknowledgement when her foxglove preparation stabilized a failing heart, she knew the proper course. Security without purpose was merely existence. The conservatory wasn't only her inheritance, it was her calling. Sunlight spread over the town, marking the passing of time. Only a few hours until Professor Merrick and the board expected a response, and somewhere between those hours, a man might appear, presenting an additional possibility. His gaze had softened when he'd spoken of her grandmother. He hadn't dismissed her work as outdated. Unlike Professor Merrick's methodical certainty, Mr. Winterborne projected an air of secrecy that tugged at her imagination. The daily posts lay unopened on her desk, father, no doubt, pressing her to agree to Atlantic Botanical's offer. A proper young lady of 1924 should embrace stability. Yet her grandmother had seen beyond the ordinary and built her life around that vision. A shadow fell onto Rosalind's desk, a tall figure on the other side of the glass. Her heart quickened. "Miss Rosalind?" Mrs. Barrett called. "The university secretary is on the phone." "I'll take the call in a minute," Rosalind replied. She belted a long wrap coat, pulled on a pair of gloves, and hurried out the door. Footprints in the snow led to the neglected rose garden. The stone cherub fountain stood dark against the winter landscape. Here her grandmother had grown roses that bloomed months past their season. Here she'd taught Rosalind about commitment and persistence, and seeing past the obvious. The footprints ended at the fountain's base. "Looking for someone?" a male voice inquired. She swiveled. Mr. Winterborne stood beside the bare trellis. Up close, his coat appeared, untouched by snow. "The university board wants to meet with me today and has a proposal," she blurted out. "What do you plan to tell them?" His deep voice carried that distinctive accent. "Will you opt for their scientific certainties?" "I won't sell the conservatory." "Ah, but won't you, though?" "You're doubting me." "Should I? Will you allow the university more than a piece of your independence?" He touched a rose cane. Ice melted beneath his fingers, and a tiny green bud appeared. "Is that the future you envision for yourself?" Before Rosalind could answer, Mrs. Barrett shouted, "Miss Rosalind, please hurry. The board secretary is quite insistent.